Good morning, everyone. We'd like to call this work session to order, and we are going to be discussing short-term rentals. As just a brief, we know that short-term rentals it's here and it's not going anywhere. It's taking over it's really taken over the world. And so with that, we wanted to look over our ordinance to make sure that our ordinance is keeping up with present day time as it pertains to Augusta, Richmond County, and what is in the ordinance, any changes that need to be made. So Director Delaney will be leading this effort from the Planning Commission, from the Planning Department, and I'm going to turn it over to her.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am here as the Director of Planning and Development to conduct a guided discussion regarding short-term rentals. The objective is for it to be an interactive experience, so we will be having conversation and dialogue about it. I will go through some of the basics, which are outlined on the screen, and then we'll have a portion where we just talk about what we would like to do. The objective of today is not to create an ordinance. The objective of today is to find out what the desire and the will of the commission is. So I want to say that a couple times. We're not creating an ordinance. We're just trying to get our arms around what the commission would like to see in regards to short-term rentals. So again, welcome, and I'll go ahead and jump right in. I am going to start, though. Before I start, I want to introduce a couple of my staff who might be chiming in. I have our auditor, Mr. Armando Takada, and then I also have our assistant auditor, that would be Mrs. Damien. Okay, and then of course my deputy director, Brian Kepner. He is also the person who has done a good bit of research on this topic with us. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and jump right in. All right, so I talked a little bit about the objective, and now I'm going to talk about the agenda for today. We're going to look at how we define short-term rentals. We're going to look at what the current codes of ordinances are as far as the city of Augusta is concerned. And then we're going to look at some southeastern jurisdictions with an emphasis on Georgia and what their ordinances look like. And then, of course, we'll have that discussion about the elements that the commission might want to pursue. All right, so I want to do this disclaimer. I'm going to read it because you always have to have one of these. In particular, because this is a hot button issue. It's gone all the way to Supreme Courts and all kind of stuff, state courts. So the purpose of this potential short-term rental regulations is not to regulate hotels, motels, extended stay hotels, or short-term rental arrangements, including but not limited to boarding houses, lodging houses, rooming houses, tourist houses, or an individual providing long-term, more than 30 days of rental or residential dwelling services. So this is just 1 to 29 days, okay? All right, so the definition of short-term rentals right now is a hosted or unhosted accommodation for transient guests where in exchange for compensation, all or a portion of a residential and or accessory dwelling unit is rented for the purpose of overnight lodging not to exceed more than 30 consecutive nights, okay? So currently our ordinance does not use this definition, but this is the most commonly accepted and one that we could endorse. And this is also the one that we've experienced the most. All right, so there are three types of short-term rentals. There's the hosted, where the host is sharing their primary resident with occupants and they're renting out a room or a guest house or a pool house. Then there's number two, the unhosted sharing, where the primary occupants of a residence vacate the entire premises and the unit is rented in total to a guest. And then three, there's a dedicated vacation rental where there are no primary occupants and it's a constant turnover. So those are the three types of short-term rentals that are most common.
Director Delaney, one moment.
Can I ask you, can you go back one slide? Because you said something that kind of piqued my interest. You said we currently don't have this.
Meaning we don't have this particular definition. So because we don't regulate with regards to the zoning ordinance, we don't call out the term short-term rentals. We have in our ordinance verbiage, and it's in here, I'm going to get to it, okay, where it says less than 30 days. But if you scanned our ordinance and you look for short-term rentals, we don't have that specific definition, but we've addressed it in other ways with the less than 30 days. Okay. Sorry about that. All right. So there's 3 types of rentals that are most common. And then here we are. This is going to what we just, your comment here. So our current regulations and how we've been looking at and monitoring short-term rentals for the purposes of collection of taxes, because the hotels are very, very interested in making sure that short-term rentals are paying their fair share in proportion to what they have to pay. So this right here in our current ordinance tells you or talks about the 6% charge if you have less than 30 consecutive days. So that anything more than 30 days, you're getting into residential housing and things of that nature. So we currently do have in our ordinance a way to charge tax. It's the excise tax rate for short-term rentals and anything under 30 days. So I don't want you all to think that we don't address it and we don't collect revenue that way. We are currently already doing that. So with that being said, I'm going to jump back to the PowerPoint. But I wanted to bring that up so you would know that it is in section 2-2-26. All right. So one of the things when we were approached about doing a work session and talking about short-term rentals is what are other people in Georgia doing? And so we went and we pulled Mr. Kepner. He pulled and conducted a comparative analysis to some of the activities that other municipalities or jurisdictions in Georgia are doing. So I just did a quick highlight. So we'll start at the top. Greene County, which is close to us, they have an exemption for business licenses April 1st through the 15th. It's particularly to capture the masters crowd. They intentionally did that. Then you've got Cherokee County, where they have no rentals exceeding 16 people in total. And then Forsyth County, they have a daytime and a nighttime maximum occupancy, which differs in case you're having a function and everyone's not staying. They put some type of verbiage in there. Then in Hall County, they have a minimum number of nights that's required for it to be considered a short-term rental. And in Savannah, Georgia, you actually apply through the Tourism Management Division, which I thought was interesting. And then the city of Tybee Island, you have to register with the database, which is required. We saw this across the United States, the registration and the registry for short-term rentals. And then South Fulton County, there's a current license publication and all ads required. So when they advertise to have a room or a facility or they have to put their business license up. One of the things that also came about is, I don't know, most of you have probably rented a short-term rental sometime in the last 2 years. They'll give you your information right at the end, the morning of that you're traveling. And then, so they've had instances where there were accidents, emergency vehicles were needed, and people didn't know the address because they gave them a turn by turn, and then they gave them go to a second floor, and it's almost a little cryptic. So for safety purposes too, they're making them publish them inside of the units, and that's something I didn't even think of, but I know we experienced it when we went to Florida last year. So so from a planning perspective, looking at everything that has been talked about, we went back and looked at what was talked about 5 years ago. And we had started the conversation about 5-6 years ago in regards to what could possibly be done. If we're going to, planning is going to put forth the effort right here and say, if you're wanting us to put together some type of ordinance, then we would recommend a framework that starts here. This isn't all encompassing, but this is where it would start. We would say that you should have to have a business license if you're going to do 1 to 30 days. We're going to recommend that a business license fee, and this is the conversation, of course, where it should be a fixed fee or a standard fee. So some places they have a flat rate for short-term rentals. Other places they base it on what their income is. So that's a question if there's, if we could decide to go that route. And then we saw several instances, places that have NASCAR events, festivals that are annual, where they had block-out dates for some of their short-term rentals. So that's number 3. We looked at April 1st through the 15th as a potential block-out date. And then limiting the occupancy to 2 people per bedroom. That one, we had a little bit of conversation about, because sometimes if you have 3-4 children, they're going to sleep in the same room. So that number could go up to 4, but the reason a lot of municipalities and jurisdictions put it in is they had overcrowding, too much partying, too many people in a room. So there's some flexibility on that. The other thing is, a lot of times the short-term rentals, the complaints we're getting now is the disruption of the neighborhood character, fabric, feel. And having on-site parking where you don't get to park on the street is one of the key things. If you don't have off-street parking, we don't recommend that it be used as a short-term rental. And then, of course, there's the business license being posted inside the unit at all times, the maximum number of daily guests, and then finally, we're saying that no more than 20% of units in multifamily buildings can be used as short-term rentals. So if planning were to pursue this at the direction of the commission, this is the basic framework of some of the regulations that we would like to see. And then we get to the real question where the discussion actually starts, I guess, here. And that's when we talk about what the commission's preferences are with what they would like to try to regulate so that we can capture your hopes for short-term rentals, and if you want to pursue anything with regards to a short-term rental ordinance. So asking what are some of the big things? So for the guided discussion portion, is there a concern about where the location of some of these short-term rentals should be? Is that one of the big concerns? Yes.
Feedback?
Yes.
For me, I'm wanting to hear more. Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily a matter of location. I just want to hear what other municipalities are doing, mm-hmm. and what we need to look at to provide that framework of, what ours should look like. And also, legalities are really big for me. Mm-hmm. So even going back to when you were talking about the comparative analysis, mm-hmm. In pulling those cities, have any of the rules been challenged legally, or are any of them pending litigation? Because just because, that municipality decides this is what we're going to put in our ordinance, I know that there have been, there's been suits, mm-hmm. because they are challenging, even as we look at the, the rentals exceeding the 16 people, but also the taxation, having a business tax if it's your primary residence and you're providing short-term rental, mm-hmm. can you require that resident to have, and I'm not asking you for legal advice, but just talking about the things that I've seen pending litigation for trying to put those restraints on people that is their primary residence.
Right. So, yes, we were careful in our comparative analysis not to include recommendations that have been challenged at in the court system. Fulton County and DeKalb County, and I think Gwinnett County also had some challenges to some of their recommendations. But the main thing, and I'll pull it up here real quick, they have handed down a decision that municipalities and jurisdictions have the authority to regulate short-term rentals. So there's, without a doubt, the opportunity for that, and it is it's a necessary thing. I am unaware of any challenges with regards to requiring a business license if the owner occupies or stays in the house while they are providing a service, because a business license is typically required anytime you provide a good or a service. So I haven't seen any successful or challenges that are moving forward that have that are specific to the regulation of requiring a business license for collection of compensation for providing lodging. So yes.
Thank you for that. Mm-hmm. But as far as it pertains to location, I don't. No. Do any of my colleagues have anything to say regarding location? You guys just chime in, open up your mics.
All right.
Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I've had a few residents reach out to me about this over the last couple of years, specifically in the Sand Hills area, where they're having Airbnbs in the neighborhood and they're using them for like parties. So like, we know that these Airbnbs can be used for a number of different things. But with that being said, if I have a resident coming to me and say, hey, Commissioner, this property next to me is being used as an Airbnb property. They're staying out all night. There's cars all over the place. How would this benefit that person's concern, or not benefit? Maybe I should use a different word. How would this address that person's concern? Because I'm sure if it's happening in the Sand Hills area, it's happening in other places too. It's happening in 7. It's happening in 1, 3, 2. Everyone is feeling it, right? As far as it being this mass sense of urgency, I haven't had much conversation, but the ones that I have had, I mean, they're pretty big complaints. So how would this address that? And then I guess, would you suggest regulating the location?
Okay. So I'll take the first one with regards to the parties and the noise. This particular, if a ordinance were drafted, it would not be able to regulate that particular portion of things, because the noise ordinance is enforced after hours, typically by the sheriff's department. With regards to the parties and things of that nature, we had the recommendation is for if you pursue it as a daytime and nighttime occupancy load. So you could actually try to curve for that, but I mean, if I own the property and I have a big family reunion that weekend, there's still going to be the same issues. So I don't think we can tackle all of it, but what you can do is try, and that's how that whole daytime occupancy versus nighttime occupancy suggestion came about.
So with the length of stay conversation, I know when we're talking about hotels, and I'm going to take a disclaimer into consideration. When we have the conversation about the day-by-day motels, and the owners of those hotels are saying they're having a hard time getting people out because they stay there longer than 30 days, it's considered a legal issue. It's considered their dwelling place. Would that apply to an Airbnb property as well?
Say it one more time.
So basically, when we were dealing with the hotel motel situations over in the Washington Road area and other places, you would have people rent those rooms for long periods of time. And when the owners would go in and try to cut that off, try to get them out of the hotel, perhaps they were engaging in illegal activity. But because they've been there for so long, they're having to actually go through the court process to get folks out of their hotels. Would regulating the length of stay avoid that from happening in Airbnbs? And so I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, have we heard of any situations to where someone is renting these Airbnbs or any kind of rental property like that for a long period of time, and then now we're having a hard time the owners are having a hard time getting people out of their properties? Is that where the length of stay regulation would come in?
That is a portion of it, but it's also about taxation, how you tax. The length, by adopting a short-term rental time definition, we would by definition put a time frame in there, because anything past the 30 days, you're moving into a housing situation, not a rental, vacation rental, short-term rental. So being clear on how we define it. Short-term rentals are not considered housing,
Right.
And it shouldn't be entertained that way. And the reason some of the hotels are coming up against it is because they're letting them roll over. You should be checking people out and then starting over. Some of the major hotels, I won't name them by name, but what they require is, say, for instance, a person is on assignment here. They have a letter that they submit that says that this person is going to be staying a total of 60 days. So they've put things in place, some of your major chains, they've put things in place to address these issues, because sometimes if a person's TDY or something like that, they're staying a little bit more, 45 days, and they don't always want to change a room. But there's typically a mechanism in place in other jurisdictions where people, and even here, they let us know, or they have some type of paperwork waiver. Typically government is exempt from it.
And could we, and that's good to know. Could we add in some type of exemption to say, for instance, someone needs to use that space for more than 30 days for whatever reason? Would there be potential to carve out some type of exemption through the ordinance, like a process that someone would go through to expand the amount of days that they want to offer their home or offer their property?
I would think I would want to research it more, because you're moving into housing, and a rental agreement should cover that. So they should be at a point where they are looking at renting the home.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so they should move. That should graduate to a rental agreement. If in all seriousness.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Frantum?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So a couple questions. The Airbnb revenue that comes in that goes to the destination Augusta, those people are just kind of doing it on their own accord, that they've received that information, or how is that collected?
So everyone who has registered with Airbnb, VRBO, the regular or the more popular and the well-known ones, they actually pay the taxes. I think it's on the 20th of every month. They're submitting their taxes. It's just like when the sales tax comes in. We're collecting it at the time of stay, and they are in return reporting that. So
Okay.
we get it.
So the municipalities that you talked about putting in, I guess, the short-term rental processes or whatever within those, like, what are they doing additionally on top of on top of that Airbnb aspect? Like, what are they doing? What are some of the examples of what they're doing? And do you know any of those fees that they're charging?
Yes, that they are charging additional fees. So that one, they have a registry, so they're usually charging a flat rate fee. Some are charging a flat rate fee. Others are charging a genuine additional tax. So on top of the base hotel motel tax, excise tax, they are charging more. But I do have my auditor here.
Yeah, can you give us examples of those fees, and then do you know what they're being used for, or kind of
Or Miss Damien?
either one of them?
They want an example of some of the additional fees that they have charged in other jurisdictions.
Can you come up here just because people might be watching online?
Yes, in regards to the $1 fee, transportation tourism fee, similar to what Savannah has, that's also included, besides the application fees, renewal fees.
What's the application fee amount?
It varies. Some go up to $150 to $400.
Is that a one-time or is that a yearly?
Well, that's the initial application fee. It's $400, but some of I see annual renewals are like $250.
I guess, what are the benefits from your perspective, Director Delaney or yourself, on having people register and you have a database of this information kind of thing? Like, what are we benefiting by doing that, I guess?
I believe that might change over time. Those lists might change over time. The names or the locations might change over time within a course of years.
But does that do anything from y'all's perspective of, holding them accountable, or like what do we? What's the benefit of doing it, I guess?
So if a registry were required, it would allow us, so for instance, this person would call in and say, we've got a lot of people here. It'll give the community a recourse for them to call into planning and say, I have a concern, there's been a lot of parties at this, and I can look and say, oh, that is a short-term rental. Because what we have to be mindful of in this whole process is that the short-term rentals aren't always known to the neighbors. It's only when it becomes a problem that people start making themselves aware. So a requirement for a registry, you would have a lead-off date, implementation timeline that you would project and put out there to let them know. All the existing registered ones would that are not going through an Airbnb and things of that nature, we would have a registry that could be made public that would allow people to know where some of the Airbnbs are. For safety purposes, a lot of times it's a question of should you publish that list. It will not capture everybody. You're always going to have a couple people who they started with Airbnb and then they got to know their guest after 2 stays, and that's who their go-to person, and they're not going back through a registered location. And if that person is just 1 or 2 people, you don't know. Is that a relative? You don't want to create a situation where neighbors are walking up on other property and like, do you live here? Why are you here? You still want to maintain some of the property owner's rights.
Yeah, and I guess, and I appreciate that feedback. I guess my question is, I have this house in my district. The gentleman that rents out the house doesn't live there. We had a death there in 2023, too. And I feel like there's, no recourse, or, I feel like we can't hold him accountable. Like, that house should be shut down and there should nobody be able to stay there unless he's living there or he sells the house. But I continue to get complaints about this house. And I guess that's why I sit here and say, like, what can we put teeth in to hold people accountable? It isn't about the money to me. Like, I don't want to go crazy on the fee. I mean, but like, if it creates a database and it makes us hold accountable and they have to fill out something that says, you understand this, or there's repercussions and these are the repercussions of what you're doing. Mm-hmm. Like, that's where I'm at in this whole process. And that's why, you know, I think that we have to do better on holding people accountable.
And I will tell you, the regulations that across the nation, they're not answering all of it. They're still having the same issues with parties. They're still having the same issues with over occupancy. It is an attempt, a genuine attempt, to try to reduce the number, but you can't regulate all of it out. People are still going to break the rules, and having some type of penalty for breaking the rules is what I'm hearing you might be desiring.
I mean, I'm just one commissioner, but I feel like we got to hold these people accountable. And currently I don't think we do. And it's got to be something in writing. It's got to be fair across the board for me. So, I mean, I have more questions that we can talk about. I think for me from the length of stay, I kind of want to go with what some of the other municipalities, the blockout dates. I feel like if we were to try to even think of going into the Masters Week, that it would just create a whole kerfuffle across the entire community. So, I mean, I'm cool with that. But I do think that we have to create, whether a database or an accountability piece to these homeowners, that they understand what they are, we understand. Because, I mean, I have a lot in my district in National Hills that, like, I get complaints about them because it's a continual Airbnb situation in a lot of them. And there's lots of bad stuff going on there, too. And, like, what can we do from a government standpoint to just hold them accountable? So
what I have seen, not repeatedly, I saw it in one jurisdiction I want to say it was West Coast. They limited, if you were in a neighborhood, how many weeks out of the year you could rent your home out, because they felt like the goal or the objective, but this one again goes back to something that's being challenged. But they felt like too much turnover, too many people coming into the community in the neighborhood. So I think they set up cap, I want to say it's 7 weeks over the course of a year, that a property could be rented in a short-term rental over the course of a year. And that was, again, the goal was to keep the neighborhood from becoming this transient turnover kind of situation. But, that's something that I think it's not sitting well with private property owners, particularly people in financial distress who are trying to dig their way out.
But I mean, that seems a little tough. But, like, I mean, I got one property owner that owns 16 properties in National Hills, and obviously we know why, but it's creating a lot of discourse between the community.
The people who actually live there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you can, when we start talking, and I'll pull that one back up, but it is not without its challenges. But there should be, if we're going to pursue it, something to preserve the fabric of the neighborhoods that are existing. Because there's another trend that's popping up where whole communities and apartment complexes are becoming short-term rentals. So, that is very, very, very big issue. The idea that someone would buy up a whole neighborhood, which they did especially during the economic downturn, and turned 70% of the neighborhood into short-term rentals. And that happens with a couple of the apartment complexes and condominiums that have been on decline. They sell them really inexpensively. Developer comes in, buys it, turns it all, upfits it, and turns it all into a short-term rental, and making sure that it fits with the zoning. Some of that can be tackled with the zoning side of things, but if they're buying a short apartment complex or condominium, or buying individual houses and renting them out, that's why I said it is a little bit more convoluted than people would like to think, especially with the emergence of, I've met people who, I got 118, I'm like, wow, you got 118 short-term rentals. And so it's a real challenge.
Commissioner Guilfoyle.
Thank you. Mr. Laney, I understand Augusta's not a destination city like Tybee, Savannah,
We are a destination city, I promise.
Okay. You know, we got the rowing regatta, we got Ironman, we got the bike, we got, you know, a couple other venues. But your gentleman that came up said the Airbnb and BRBO actually pays their taxes. All right. So how are we going to capture these individuals that's renting their duplex, townhomes, houses for short-term rentals if they're not going through these two companies?
That's where a registry could come into play. But
So-
essentially, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So it's just like no different than when we passed the ordinance on the animal control for people to make sure their dogs, cats, spayed, neuter, and have little tracking devices, etc. It's done at the will of the person. Would that be correct?
I can't attest to the animal control ordinance.
Right,
at all.
but what I'm saying, it's a honest honesty system. If somebody has houses that they rent out and they realize there's an ordinance in place, they're going to come register, and if they deem not to, they just playing the game until they get caught. Would that be correct?
It should be. I wouldn't consider it a voluntary system. I think that we have a job to educate the public in regards to the requirements for short-term rentals, and then there's the enforcement of that penalty. I think that when you write the regulations, some of them had penalties where if you were the first time you were notified, this is the recourse. If you did it again, so you got like a warning, a fine, and so if a person didn't know, they got the opportunity to register. But
How do you know that somebody's renting something out?
that's what I'm saying. You create a tattletale system amongst neighbors. That's what you do. The neighbors have to call us and tell us there's a problem.
Okay, but it doesn't take additional programs or different additional staff to oversee this?
No, we're not doing. We didn't write an ordinance. We were just having a discussion. Would that require it based on the number of short-term rentals that are in the not CSRA, but in Richmond County? I've looked, but I looked around Master's time, so people popped up on there that wouldn't typically be on there. A better test is outside of the summer months.
I'm sorry, what was that last statement?
A better testament to how many there are versus how much staff time would be required would be to look outside of the masters in the summer. Right. Yeah.
Okay.
But I couldn't say at this point more staff would be required or would not be required, if that's the question.
Right. If we only capture 10 people in a year, I don't think it'd be worth to pursue. But thank you, Mr. Delaney. Thank you for your staff spending time to compile this information for us as well.
Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Question about the business license. We can go back a slide or a few slides, wherever. Here we are. So 1 to 30 days shall require a business license. This wouldn't apply for just a regular homeowner who's wanting to rent out one of their properties. So if I have an additional home somewhere, I want to turn it into a rental property, would I have to have a business license for that too, if it's long term?
If you have 2 or more rental properties, you are already required to have a
You
business
do now?
license.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so yeah, that's already in place.
So clearly I'm not renting any property out because I know that. Okay, all right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. Let's see here. What about, is there appetite for more fees or taxes? I know Commissioner Frantum said that's not the end game for him, but it is a way to discourage violators. It's a tool.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, I
Commissioner
think that,
Johnson.
thank you. I think the biggest thing is fees for violators, like you said. I mean, I think having a business license requirement is going to be helpful. You mentioned earlier, and I think this was mentioned earlier, that other cities have like an application fee, $150 something to apply to go this route.
Yep.
Minimum, okay. So that could be explored, but I think for certain a fee for violators would be helpful. I mean, because that's really the only way that you're going to be able to regulate this. It's the only way we're going to be able to make sure that what we're trying to accomplish gets done. And of course, we're not going to catch everybody. And I don't think that's the goal. I think the goal is to put in some framework to be able to regulate,
Noise, traffic.
and then essentially the running of a business in neighborhoods. So I think potentially looking at some type of application fee would be helpful. But we want to make it accessible. So if anybody just wants to do this, we need to make it accessible. But I think cracking down on folks who don't go this route is going to be the biggest piece of the pie for me. That's just my 2 cents on that one. Yeah.
Commissioner Frantum.
My question is going back to the fact that we have these houses that have more than 2 families living in them and the owner's not there. Mm-hmm. What can we do in that respect?
Living, like more than 30
yeah.
days?
Well, there's more than 2 families living in this rental. They're renting out by rooms. They got 4 bedrooms, and they don't live there. The homeowner doesn't live there.
Okay, so that's not short-term rental. That would be potentially an illegal boarding or rooming house. So that would be, you wouldn't want to put this as part of the short-term rentals. It is separate. But if there is an illegal boarding house, one of the things our current ordinance defines what a rooming house and a boarding house is and where they are allowed. In addition to that, there can be some expansion on a potential definition of, there's a word that I'm going to butcher, but consanguinity, I think is what it is. It's where a certain number of unrelated people can live in the same house at the same time, and you can limit that. So there is the opportunity for that on the boarding house and expansion of definition portion of things, but not for short-term rental.
What do violators, is there steps of first time this happens, second time this happens, or is it just?
For violations of the zoning ordinance? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, typically we end up, if we have a persistent issue and they don't have a business license, the first step would be is if they had a business license. If they did, we would bring it before the commission and ask for, one of the 3 possibilities: probation, suspension, revocation. If they don't have a business license and we can't take that action or stop them, then we would collaborate. We'd talk to legal and see if they could give us guidance on how to go through the court process, because there is that process for people who continually violate the ordinance.
Yeah, and I think it's not even what Commissioner Johnson said. For me, is that I think we need to be more stiff. I mean, in whatever the penalties are. Okay. And for me, I would be like, if you're a repeat offender, it's going on your taxes, and it's a significant amount to where they know they better not do it again, or it's an additional amount on their taxes. And we need to stop trying to play the game of being nice about it, because it's evident they don't think we mean business, and that a lot of these homeowners can just do what they want. But if they see these fees, they start seeing them on their taxes at the end of the year, and these additional fees, if we can do that, then I think it would deter people, and they'd be like, well, we better follow the rules, because right now there's no rules in their mind, frankly. And that's why, that's where it is to me. I agree that the application fee, all that's fine. I mean, I just didn't want to charge $500. It wasn't about the money, it's about the process and them understanding it. Mm-hmm. But on the back end, when they violate, that's where I want to hit them hard, because I think we're not hitting them hard enough.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I have a question and / comment. So for the fees and the business license to rent out your primary residence, and I'm thinking about in instances where you actually live in the property. So maybe you're just renting, for instance, had a neighbor who has now moved, but they visited the lake throughout the summer. So every time they went to the lake, they just rented out their property. So they rented it out on a consistent basis. Are we considering that a business? Because I'm renting it out to the same person each time I leave. Would that be, can you in fact consider that a business just because I'm renting my house out to someone?
The exchange of money, the receipt of compensation, the exchange of services or goods, that is a business. That's the very definition of a business. So if you're taking money versus house swapping, because house swapping is different. If you go to the lake and I go to your city house, we're doing an even exchange. No money is taking place, changing hands. That is different. I will say that there is an app for that, and there are fees that are regulated for that too if you use the app. because that business is paying for a business license. But if anytime compensation is being exchanged or money's being exchanged, you've got a business.
My second part to that was dealing with the violators. I guess I want a little bit more from my colleagues. I know we talked about parties, and so like loud parties, noise, nuisances, and things of that nature. But I'm thinking about what could possibly come up. So if this house is a short-term rental, and it's been a few parties there and it's been noisy, but me as the property owner, I stay in that house. I just rent my house out on occasion. There were 3 loud parties that were reported. However, my neighbor down the street that never rents out their property, they've also had loud parties at their home. They're not being charged fees. The sheriff may be showing up, but there's no fees associated with it. How would we address that? Did my question make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I go back to the very definition of a business. One is running a business. There are requirements for a business. There are requirements for your property as a homeowner. And when the sheriff comes out or any type of law enforcement comes out for noise violation, they have the ability to draft that citation to a property owner if that's their party and the party, is a continual problem. But if you are running a business and accepting money, you have rules about how you're supposed to keep your property up, noise, closing at the proper hours. That's nothing that has to be drafted. That's already in existence on how to operate a business based on your zoning and your classification.
Thank you. Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So 2 questions. Number one is, and again, excuse my ignorance if this comes off as being a duh question. If I go on the Airbnb app now or any of those other apps and I rent a home, I rent a stay downtown or anything, are there any fees built into that system that comes to the city?
Yes.
Okay, and that's just, what fees are those? Are those taxes?
Taxes.
Okay, and that's just your regular tax metric that we have on our books right now, nothing additional.
Based on your
So if we regulated, if we went a little bit deeper into regulating short-term rentals through those types of apps, Airbnb, I don't know, which one? That one, the rest of them. What additional? So there would be additional fees attached through the app or something like that. How does that work? And maybe that's not a us question.
And that's where, depending on who you speak with, it feels like overtaxation. Just depends on who you talk to, because now each business will actually be paying. The business is paying a tax. But I will say, if you say it that way, you want to be mindful of Airbnb is a business, and I hate using their name, so I apologize. Take that out. Every time I've said it, just delete.
Sorry, Wayne Brown.
Dump that out. So anytime you go with a existing business or a conglomerate that might already be doing it, the taxes are being paid by the person who's renting the property. So that property owner is not absorbing that tax. I want to be clear. They're not paying it, even though they will say, oh, we've been taxed twice. No, the person staying paid the tax. If you establish a business license requirement, that is where the person who has the property and is receiving the compensation is having to pay their fair share, so to speak, of the tax portion for running a business. And that may require regulating, that may require city resources to visit that site, to do inspections, or to deal with complaints.
Yeah. And then my final question is, we just have to ask, do you foresee any unintended consequences going down this road?
Yes.
Okay. Can you share those with us?
I think that we have to be careful. I think that if an ordinance were pursued, from my perspective, there's a concern that you're taking away a potential opportunity for some people to come up a little bit, make a little money. Yeah. Some people aren't benefiting to the tune of $10,000. Some people are using it to bridge an income shortage. That's their family vacation money and things of that nature. I think the real concern is the people who rent the locations, and you have the parties and you have the on-street traffic. I think that an ordinance, those people who are violating, I'm not 100% sure an ordinance is going to discourage them. Every day we have fines that come out of our office for different things, and depending on how much a person pays or nets, they will pay the fine. We've got a $500 fine. People still will build something without a permit, and then they'll call and ask one of you to call us. And so, it's a real problem. And I think the goal would be to target the problem issues and the problem areas, but an ordinance kind of gives that impression that we're looking at it overall, but it could inadvertently put a burden on some people who do this just to get over the hump at Thanksgiving. They're not even doing Masters Week. They're doing Thanksgiving or Christmas and things of that nature. So even the blockout date could potentially hurt a person. Yeah, and that's why, and I'm glad you mentioned it. I mentioned that a few moments earlier about the application fee. If we take the application route, it needs to be accessible. It needs to be a rate that's accessible to people, because I know folks who fit that category who have a beautiful home and they rent it out just to make a little extra income. And, we don't want to limit that, but we want to make sure that we're also protecting the integrity of communities. Right. And we're essentially holding all business owners to the same standard, because essentially that is a business. So I would just hope that if we do decide to go down this route, which I think is a pretty good route to go, we need to make sure that we're not doing it in a way to where, like you said, just the new family trying to make a few dollars to go out of town or to cover a bill or something like that still has access to making a few extra dollars. But we're cracking down on the folks who are buying 12 or 15 properties, and now they're running a big enterprise. And maybe there can be some type of carve out. I know we don't want to discriminate between who's doing what, how, but there's a big difference between you having a multitude of properties and you're making good money and you're not reporting any of that, right? Versus just someone who's trying to get up the road for the weekend. So maybe just keep those two in consideration when we're having this conversation. Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you.
Madam Administrator.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to point out, Commissioner Johnson, you were asking about the taxes, and while individuals that register with a agency of some sort, a brokerage firm, I'll call it, to utilize their home for rental purposes, they are taxed. Those dollars do not represent part of our general fund, or Augusta does not reap those dollars, because they are part of the hotel motel tax, which goes to the Coliseum Authority as well as Destination Augusta, formerly known as CVB. Now, we started collections in July of 2021, and in 2022, we collected about $930,000. And from January to March of this year, we've already collected a little over $300,000. We don't have April's numbers as of now, but if we hold steady with that first quarter average, we'll be looking at about $1.2 million in revenue. Again, hotel motel tax. I also wanted to ask a question to Director Delaney. Would a registry help weed out those property owners that are utilizing their home as a short-term rental for long-term gain, but are also filing homestead exemption? Would that help?
I can't be sure of that, because I'm thinking about it from the perspective of, if I'm a CPA and I have my business in my home, I pay property taxes, I have a business license, and I still get my homestead exemption. If we'd be splitting hairs a little bit to go that granular. If you live in it and it's yours, I wouldn't make that. I wouldn't go that granular.
I want to go back to, just because I'm really trying to work through this party and nuisance, how can we say that the rest of the year, and I'm talking about aside from April 1st to, the first week in April, when the Augusta Nationals has the 1st through the 15th, we know that there are parties going on, and some of those parties may get loud. How can we say this is the only week where we're going to allow that? Like, can you do that? Can you say that, during this week we're going to allow loud parties, but everyone else that has parties throughout the year, of course you're not going to say it in that way, but, it happens, and sometimes we look the other way or we excuse it. But can we, in fact, not enforce it during that week and just enforce it the rest of the year? And I'm just asking.
There are other jurisdictions that have successfully instituted a blockout date period. So yes, you don't have to say what days they are. You can actually avoid saying the 1st through the 15th and say something like, you have 2 weeks out of the whole year in which you are allowed, to be exempted from the registry. You don't have to make it specific to those dates. I will tell you that in the absence of those specific dates, who's going to track and regulate if this, I only had 2 days here, 7 days here, 3 days here. That's why the block became, I think that's the reason why the block became the predominant thing that we saw. But yes, people, other counties and municipalities have successfully instituted the block.
Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you. Out of all of the counties that we did a review on, which one was the most favorable in comparison to what we have facing us in Richmond County?
I will say intentionally we kept out of the metro Atlanta area because some of theirs are still being, they're still having some lawsuits and potential lawsuits over it. I think Hall County was one of the ones that was brought to us as something as an example of something that we could closely identify with. Or an example of what we would get to soon. But I wouldn't say any of them are in the same exact situation. We do have the Masters, and it is an income driver. And now you've got the women's tournament ahead of it too. So, that's why you can't just say 5 days, 7 days, and as things expand, you have to deal with that too. So there's a potential for other activities to come back and say, hey, well, Ironman is generating this much, this activity. You can open a can of worms if you make it. But we are unique in that Augusta has a lot of activities that our tourists are coming to. So, yeah. Okay. I'm sorry.
And then Tybee Island. Mm-hmm. Can you go back to the Tybee Island slide? Tybee Island, so that's what we're talking about, the database and the registry through Tybee Island.
Most of them I would say 50% of these require a database registration. I just tried to pull out the uniqueness. Okay. And so that the registry is not uncommon at all. It is, I would say it's pretty much the standard.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Nope. This is all discussion. So,
at this time, I would like to ask if there are any questions from anyone in our audience. If you do have a question, you can come up to the mic and you have to state your name and your address. If you have any questions, comments, concerns. Okay.
All right. So, of course, planning and development staff will make themselves available to answer any questions that you might have going forward. But the next step is for this subcommittee to decide if they want to move forward, and it would need to go through the commission channels where you would direct us to actually draft something to that effect. So that is in essence, the next step. After a decision is made, you'd have to let us know that y'all want us to actually go down this road and pursue it in ordinance. And that is all that planning has to present.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, Director Delaney.
All right, thank you.
Hold on.
Oh, I'm sorry. I did not see you. Commissioner Williams.
What would be the basis of the ordinance? What exactly would it cover?
It would go back to some of the things. If we were to propose, if there was an ordinance, we would start talking about daytime versus nighttime occupancy. We would talk about on-street parking versus off-street parking. We would try to, the things that have become a nuisance with short-term rentals, we want to capture those within the ordinance and address them so that there are some rules and you can tie a penalty to a regulation or a rule. That would be the goal based on what I'm hearing today.
Okay, I don't think what you have is bad, but I think you have to pull in and talk with the folks over at the sheriff's department because, some of these things they may or may not be willing to get involved in. And a lot of times we make an ordinance or say that this is something that we want to do, and they just don't enforce them. So we don't want to write an ordinance or build an ordinance that folks basically don't agree with. So I'm just saying you just need to pull those other folks and factors in before we, go down that road.
Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you. And to that point, would these regulations be enforced by the sheriff's office, or would they be more so enforced by code enforcement or code compliance? I'm sorry.
The violators that happen during business hours, we, I would say 8 to 6, code enforcement could take. A lot of the noise stuff that happens after hours, 9, 10 o'clock parties, there becomes a safety component to it that we would not tackle.
Okay. And then, say for instance, something happens at the hours, and there's some type of continuity between your office and the sheriff's office, and they notify you that this happened at this property last night. Would you then take code enforcement or code compliance officers into going down this route? So let me clean my question up, because I just had a whole short circuit. If I have a property and I have a disturbance happen after hours, and the sheriff's office comes out, okay, they report it to you that, hey, this happened at this property last night, it's against the ordinance, would you all get involved during working hours, is I guess essentially what I'm asking for.
Yeah.
Okay.
Even now, like nightclubs, death, we have a relationship with coroner's office, whether in the sheriff's office. If you have a person running a business, even a home, and there's a violation there that we can help with, we already jump in. We already have that dynamic there.
So would that mainly be your all's responsibility over the sheriff's office, or is it just kind of like a shared?
We share.
Task.
Yes.
Okay.
If they encounter it first, or if we encounter it first, we share.
But if there's drug activity, if there's loud noise, someone gets killed, something like that, that's more so on them. But then you all come in on the code enforcement side.
Come in on the code enforcement side. If say for instance someone died and then the property is a hoarder's house, then we come in on the hoarding side. I want to be very, very careful to make sure it's clear that if there's a crime or illegal activity, that's not code. Right. That is 100% law enforcement. Mm-hmm. But we work in tandem. If they call us and say, hey, we got this situation, and they do call us. They email us, they send us pictures. We have a good conversation.
So in this regard, if we wanted to take this route, it would just simply take a commissioner to put on the full commission agenda to would it have to go through full commission or committee? Because we have to authorize the crafting of an ordinance first, right?
You have to ask permission.
So would that have to go through committee first?
Yes.
Okay.
But
Please. Well, Madam Chair, I can't say that.
Yes. Attorney Brown.
short-term rentals have been looked at for a lot of years. I think there's a lot more work. I think it would be premature for the commission to authorize the drafting of an ordinance at this point. I think there's a lot more questions that need to be worked out in terms of enforcement of the ordinance, enforcement of citations. There need to be a whole process with that. And like Commissioner Bobby Williams mentioned, even though this body is the commission to carry out these ordinances, it sometimes involves other branches and agencies of governments, and I think they need to be in the discussion as opposed for these things to be imposed top down. I think it still should be viewed as an extremely preliminary stage. And also we really need to, I don't think we have quantified how real this need is as opposed to the benefit we're going to get. Like some people may say, I want to just make sure these neighborhoods are not overrun. Some people say, I want to use this for money taxation purposes, et cetera. How much real complaints do we have? I'm not sure that it's known, and the public hasn't weighed in or anything.
So would you suggest a part two to this work session, like a part two with the sheriff's office and maybe some public input before we move forward, kind of like how we did with the non-discrimination ordinance workshop?
I think every agency that would be involved in carrying out what the commission may eventually do need to be contacted prior to any drafting to get their way in.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Frantum.
Madam Chair, that's what I was gonna suggest, that maybe we try to schedule another one in 30 to 45 days, but let's make sure that the entities that are mentioned are kind of abreast of the situation, can maybe give their presentation, maybe set them a 5-minute presentation on the pros and cons, their thoughts. Like, I don't want them to come here and just hear us. I want them to like already have it ready to roll.
Absolutely.
On whether they think this is something that we should do or not do, and how real the problem is as well. I agree. So that'd be my 2 cents.
Okay, great. Director Delaney, thank you so much for your presentation. You did an outstanding job, and I greatly appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for coming. This is the end of our work session.